Hi, and welcome to Back Pocket Universe. I'm Elliot, and on this channel I like to review vintage science fiction paperbacks. Today I will be reviewing The Winds of Time, which fits my criteria perfectly. I think looking at the cover you can see why I could not resist pulling this particular book off the shelf. The design is amazing and beautiful. The colors are fantastic. I love the typography. And here you have a picture of someone in a pretty wild-looking spacesuit with a crashed spaceship in the background, and he's being shot at with arrows. And that is actually fairly true to a scene in the story. I would say the spacesuit is a little bit elaborated, but hey, who's complaining with something like this, right? The book is by Chad Oliver, who was apparently a fairly prolific science fiction author in the mid-century. I don't think that I've ever read anything by Chad Oliver before, and that has to be chalked up, I suppose, to pure negligence on my part. I will definitely be keeping an eye out for more Chad Oliver books in the future. Chad Oliver was apparently an anthropologist and an avid fly fisherman, and anthropology of a sort and fly fishing are both elements in this book. The central character of this book is named Wes Chase. He was an ear, nose, and throat doctor who is on vacation in the mountains of Colorado with his wife. And the beginning of the book follows him as he goes out on a fishing excursion. And during that fishing excursion is captured by what appears to be a sort of a wild man or a monster. It's described in rather monstrous terms to begin with, but over time, as you'll see, we learn that this is not in fact a monster. It is a human being, and a regular human being. And I'm going to go ahead and give some spoilers for this story. I've been debating whether that's something that I should do, but hey, this book has been around since 1957, so I think spoilers are okay. If you don't want spoilers, please go get a copy of this book and read it before watching the rest of this video. The Winds of Time is easy to find in both physical and digital form, so find yourself a copy and read this if you don't want spoilers for the rest of the video. Otherwise, I'll give some stuff away just to describe the plot. So Wes Chase is dragged into a cave, literally carried into a cave by this wild man, and he's held captive. And as the story unfolds, we see that he is held against his will for a significant period of time, during which this monster or wild man learns English. He learns to communicate with Wes Chase. And so within the course of a couple chapters, we are able to start hearing Arvon's story. Arvon is the guy who captures Wes, and Arvon is in the cave with some of the rest of the crew of the spaceship that he arrived on Earth in. The spaceship is called the Good Hope, but the crew just called it the Bucket. And the rest of the crew besides Arvon at the beginning of the story is in suspended animation. So this is a very interesting premise. Arvon and his crew are from a planet that developed nuclear technology and then developed space travel and went out into the stars to look for other humans, to see what they could see on other planets. And it takes some time for the author to reveal what the exact nature of their mission is. And he kind of leaves you in a suspense for a while. But it turns out to be something really interesting that I had certainly never considered as a premise before and was surprised by. Basically, the idea is that their planet developed nuclear technology, developed a sort of a tesseract to allow them to travel between stars in hyperspace. And they have found that many, many, many other planets have humans on them. I think the number is something over 200 planets that they've explored that have had humans on them. But either humans have developed nuclear technology and have destroyed themselves, or they have not yet reached the point where they developed nuclear technology and their fate is still in the balance. But among all the other planets that have humans on them that Arvan and his crew, or Arvan and people from his planet have found, no other planet has both developed nuclear technology and survived to tell about it. And so the nature of their mission is a sort of desperate philosophical one. Their planet is okay. Their planet has reached a balance of society, and really it feels as their planet is described in the book very much like a somewhat idealized mid-century Earth, and that's it. But they haven't destroyed themselves, and they, I think, are trying to answer the question of will they inevitably destroy themselves, having this technology in hand, even though they've survived long enough to go into space. In any case, they're haunted by this discovery that they've made. And the desperation with which they pursue this mission is really quite intense, you find throughout the book. The other interesting element of this story is that Arvan and his crew landed on Earth 15,000 years ago. And during that time, they have been in suspended animation in this cave. And so as we follow the story of Arvan, we follow the story of them landing in a primitive prehistoric Earth and meeting some of the primitive prehistoric natives and trying to decide how they are going to proceed with their mission, because their ship has been destroyed and they have no way of returning to their home planet. And ultimately what they decide to do is to place themselves in suspended animation until humanity has reached a level of technology that they are able to potentially return to the stars. But with the understanding that if humans have developed that level of technology, there is a statistical chance that they will wake up 15,000 years later in a nuclear wasteland. A very high statistical chance. And so there's a lot of interesting tension around that decision. Let's talk about some things that I liked about this book. First of all, there's an element of deep time, which for me, I'm a sucker for. I really like stories that go deep into the past or deep into the future. And this certainly goes deep into the past in terms of the prehistoric landing of the ship. Another thing I like about the story is that the characters are quite complex and nuanced. Wes Chase, despite his sort of action hero name, is not a hero. He is a semi-sympathetic character. I have to admit that at the beginning of the story, I really didn't like him very much. I didn't like the way that he treated his wife, and I just did not find him a very sympathetic character at all, and he wasn't heroic. So it's certainly not that kind of story. In addition to that, Arvan and his crew are not really portrayed as heroes either. They're complicated. They're mixed. They are very desperate to pursue their mission. They're all haunted by the nature of what they found in the galaxy, and for that reason they are very interesting and sympathetic, but they're nuanced. And this book operates in a kind of a gray area that I find to be very realistic, and even engages in some conversation about what it means to be a hero. There's also some good character development in this book. The character of Wes at the beginning is not the same as the character of Wes at the end. He goes through quite an ordeal because he's held captive against his will in this cave for months by Arvon, which I found to be surprising and unnerving. There's also a really interesting premise of this book. Is self-destruction inevitable? And that's something I certainly would like to discuss more at the end of this video. There are also some things that I didn't like about this book. Everything felt a little bit too familiar. If I read a story about the distant future or the distant past, I really want some things to surprise me. And when Arvon and his crew land on the prehistoric Earth, it is exactly what you would imagine. Just imagine looking at a panorama in the Natural History Museum of prehistoric Earth with cavemen and mammoths and spears and huts and stuff like that. And that's what it is, which is fine. Chad Oliver was an anthropologist. He stayed, firmly within the box of agreed upon history for his delve into the past here, and that's okay, but it just didn't really appeal to me. If you're going to go that far into the past, I'd really love to see something that surprised me about what we find there, because I've always liked to imagine that if I had some magic lens that I could use to look deep into the past like that it wouldn't be exactly the way that we would imagine it to be. That some things would catch us by surprise to one extent or another. So there was this kind of feeling of predictability or familiarity in the book that I couldn't quite shake, and that even extended to Arvon and his crew. Arvon and his crew are from an alien planet, but they act and think just like mid-century Americans, even down to their kind of slang and lingo, the way that they interact with each other and the nature of their motivations and their actions are really indistinguishable from if you were reading a story about a crew of Earthling astronauts that was written in the mid-20th century. So I thought that there was room for a little bit more creativity or exploration in that area. What it did accomplish is that it made them, I suppose, somewhat more sympathetic as characters and easy to understand. But I thought that the central premise of the book, of this sort of like desperate search for another planet of humans that had not destroyed itself or did not seem to be on track to destroying itself, was something that felt, for lack of a better term, inhuman enough to me that it would have been okay to make Arvon and his crew a little bit less human in their actions and motivations, to just give them a little bit of alienness, to mix things up a little bit. Those are fairly minor criticisms. Overall, I liked the book. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really interesting premise, and it had some great ideas in it. At the core of the book was this question of inevitability. Is it inevitable that humans, given the chance, will destroy themselves? And the book was written in 1957, so this was just about a decade after the nuclear bomb was first used, and obviously it was a time period in which there was a really palpable sense of suspension. The Cold War was really getting into full swing, and of course, a lot of science fiction literature in this general time period explores the apparent inevitability that humans would use these weapons, and we would destroy ourselves. And looking back at it from where we are now, it's really interesting to note that that hasn't happened. And I think that for a lot of science fiction writers at this time, it was difficult to imagine that the self-destruction of the species wasn't inevitable, because any piece of technology that is created is ultimately used. And so we find ourselves in the interesting position of having had nuclear technology in 2023 for 70 years, something like that, and also having not used it since Hiroshima, since Nagasaki. And that, I think, has, for most of us, calmed that fear and put it in the background. Even though we understand at some level but that these weapons do exist and could be used, we've gone for a long enough period of time without them being used that it feels less inevitable, less likely that they would ultimately. And so I think that gives someone like me an interesting perspective reading the story of the book, which is, this feeling that at least so far, the time that has passed so far, humans have made it. We have managed to simultaneously possess this technology but not using it. And that's, if the technology does have a value, that value is only there so long as it is not used. The story had a more interesting element to it, though, a more interesting question even than that, and that had to do with loss. There was a central theme in this story about loss. The crew of the Good Hope are trying to find a way to get back home, even though it becomes apparent over the course of the story that if they do, by some slim chance, manage to get back home, it will not be the same home that they left, because 15,000 years will have passed. And there's a similar thing going on with Wes Chase. Wes Chase is held captive in this cave for months. And there's an interesting development with his character as he is held captive in this cave. His view of his wife becomes more idealized, and he begins to really process his regrets about how he's handled life so far. And when he's finally able to emerge from the cave, he learns what the crew of the Good Hope has learned, this old adage, you can't go home again. Anytime you leave what you're familiar with and some time passes, when you return to it, it's different than the way that you remembered. And that's part of the human condition. We're all moving forward through time, and we can't escape the process of change. And as we move ahead, even if things get better, there's the inevitable sense of loss of the things that we leave behind. And I really appreciated the exploration of those concepts in this story. And overall, I would definitely recommend that you find a copy of this book. If you are in the US and would like my copy of The Winds of Time, just leave a comment on this video and include the hashtag raffle. Any comments that are left on the video within the next week, I will put into a random raffle and select one, and I will send you my copy of the book as my way of saying thanks for watching these videos. Next week, I'm going to be reviewing The Case Against Tomorrow by Frederick Pohl. This is a collection of short stories by Pohl. I found that these Frederick Pohl collections are extremely ubiquitous on the bookshelves of local shops, and I mean, this just has a great cover. So we'll start with that, and I'm reading this now and really look forward to reviewing it next week. So with that, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you.